This is something that took place back when I was about 12 years old. During this time, I lived with my parents and siblings in a neighborhood with lots of houses in it. However, not every house looked the same, and there were many different sized yards. I remember that there was this one house a ways down my street that was abandoned. I didn't know the story on it, but I know that one of my friends lived 2 doors down from it. This house had a bigger yard, and there were lots of trees on the property as well. So many, in fact, that you could barely even see the house from the street. It had been abandoned for several years, and I honestly don't know why. I had a few friends that lived in the neighborhood, and I went to school with them and stuff. One evening, I was hanging out with the friend who lived by the abandoned house. His name was Kyler. It was approaching sunset, and I was over in his yard. I don't remember how, but we got to talking about the abandoned house. I was curious about it, because I didn't know anything other than that it was abandoned. Kyler said that we should go over and look at it, so we walked along the sidewalk in front of his house and past the next door neighbors. Then we were standing in front of the abandoned house. There was a gate that was a little bit open and really rusty. The front yard was overgrown with long grass and lots of trees that needed trimming. I remember that Kyler just started walking up in the yard. I followed him, and then he walked past the gate. At that point, I asked him if we were allowed to go back here. He said, "Yeah, the property's abandoned, so who cares?" Then he claimed that he had been in the yard several times before. He started showing me the house and talking about it. We went all the way around it and into the backyard. There, the grass was also overgrown, but there were patches of dirt as well. Then we noticed that a back door to the house was open a little bit. Kyler and I walked over to it. I think that we were both pretty curious as to why the door was open. We both knew 100% that the house was abandoned. Kyler said that the door was not open the last time he was back there. I asked him if he had ever seen the inside of the house before, and he said no. At that point, we both decided to go in. Kyler opened the door just enough for us both to enter. Once we were inside, we saw that all the lights appeared to be off. It was getting dark out now, so the visibility wasn't the greatest. I could tell, though, that there really wasn't much of anything inside the house at all. We were in what was maybe the dining room or living room. I saw a kitchen area to the left. We both walked in farther and saw that there were a few pieces of old furniture here and there, but really not much. I remember seeing a staircase going up, but we walked past it and went towards this hallway. I had a bad feeling about the whole thing, and I didn't really want to be there. To me, we had seen enough and probably should be going. But Kyler continued to walk through the house and went down the hallway into what I think was a bedroom. I remember that I stayed back a little bit. I was still in the hallway when Kyler walked inside of the bedroom. At that point, though, I suddenly heard these footsteps. It sounded like somebody was actually upstairs. I listened close and realized that somebody was definitely coming down the staircase. I quickly ran over into the room that Kyler was in. This appeared to be mostly empty as well. I told Kyler that I heard somebody coming down the stairs. At first, he didn't believe me and thought that I was just messing with him. But a moment later, we both heard the footsteps arriving at the bottom of the stairs. I went over and quietly closed the door to the room that we were inside of. We heard the person begin to walk around. The footsteps got slightly closer to us. My heart was beating like crazy, and I was literally sweating. The footsteps did not enter the hallway, though. Instead, they headed to the front side of the house. When this happened, Kyler and I knew that we needed to get out of there. We felt that whoever was in there probably heard us, and they were now looking for us. I opened the door, and then we both sprinted out of the hallway into the back door of the house. Luckily, it was still open how we left it. Neither of us bothered to look back where the person had walked. When I was going out the door, though, I did hear footsteps approaching, but they were still a distance away. We both left the house, and then fled on foot around the house and back out onto the sidewalk. Then we both went back to Kyler's house. Whoever had been inside of the house did not leave or follow us. After that night, we never went back there again. I'm not sure who was in there. That was one of the scariest moments of my life, though. This is something that took place years ago, when I think I was about 19. During this time, I lived with my parents in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I was working only about a mile away from home at a store. It was a part-time job, but I remember that at one point, my car broke down and had to be fixed. I would be without it for a few days, but still had to work. During this time, I walked the mile distance to work, which was really not too bad. It was a little bit different route than I would take while driving though. So the first day that I was walking to work, I remember I passed by this old convenience store in town. The store was now abandoned and had been for several years. I went there a couple of times when I was really young, and seeing it brought back a lot of memories, but I walked right past it to work. However, when I got off work and I was walking home afterwards, I passed by the store again. This time, I was curious and I walked closer. There was a small empty parking lot in front and to the side of the store. The store was very small, and it was basically like a convenience store that you would see with a gas station, except there were never any gas pumps at this one. I walked up to the front and looked inside one of the windows. Inside, the lights were off, but things looked like they hadn't been touched in years. There was still a lot of things inside the store. It was sort of messy and looked really strange to see. It was interesting to me though, and I stood at the window for maybe 5 minutes. As I was looking around, I suddenly saw a man come out from behind one of the aisles inside. This was really strange because the building was abandoned. The man looked right at me, and I quickly turned and walked away. I kept going down the sidewalk back home. It was really creepy to see a person inside there. The man did not appear to be any kind of construction worker or anything like that. I went the rest of the way back home, and the next day when I walked to work, I went past the store again. But that night, I got off a little bit later than usual. I was walking right by the store again on my way home. This time, I got curious once more, and I stopped to look in the window. It was much darker now with it being nighttime. When I was looking though, once more a man appeared from behind an aisle, this time much quicker than the last time. This guy started walking towards me at the window, and I turned and walked away again. I left the parking lot and then went back onto the sidewalk. Then I crossed a nearby street and went onto another sidewalk. But it was about at that point where I heard footsteps behind me. The sidewalk that I was on was very quiet, and nobody else would ever really walk on it. So this was strange. I turned around and looked, and saw the guy who had been inside of the convenience store. He was walking a pretty long ways back, but appeared to be walking after me. It made me a little bit nervous, but I kept going home. I probably had about 10 minutes left of walking to get there. Most of it was straight, but I would turn several more times. The first turn that I made, I was positive that the guy would keep going straight, but he didn't. He turned with me, and that made me a lot more nervous that he actually was following me. He wasn't really gaining on me at all though, so I started to walk faster. The next turn, I didn't see him for a while after I had made it around, and I actually thought that he was gone. But then I saw him come around the corner and continue to follow me. By this point, I didn't have a whole lot farther to go. I kept walking, and soon my house was in sight. I looked back, and the guy was still there following me. At that point, I made a run for it, and it's probably something that I shouldn't have done. I started sprinting, but at the time that I did, for some reason, I looked behind me. The man also started to sprint. I ran for my house, and luckily it wasn't that far away. I arrived and struggled to unlock the door, but eventually I got it open and went inside. I looked out of the front window and saw the guy now walking down the sidewalk. He did not come into our yard, but stopped and was just kind of standing there on the sidewalk in front. He was not looking at me, and he wasn't even looking at our house, but he was just standing in front of it, looking down the street. Then, after about a minute, I saw him turn around and walk back. I don't know what he was doing. He was probably mad at me for looking inside of the store, but I really didn't mean anything bad by it. I was just curious. After that, I walked a different route to and from work until I got my car back. I'm not sure when it changed, but today, the convenience store is a newer one. This happened back when I was a kid. I think I was maybe 8 or 10 years old. I lived in a neighborhood that had a cul-de-sac on it. There were several kids in the neighborhood that I was friends with, and we would all hang out. So one night, I was with some friends and we were playing several games in the street. We started playing hide and go seek, and we basically had the entire cul-de-sac to ourselves. My friends and I lived in almost every house on the cul-de-sac, except maybe 2 or 3 of them. One house though, the one at the very end, was abandoned. Everybody knew that, but not many people knew why. It was an old house, and I really couldn't remember the last time anybody did live there. So I remember that one of my friends stood in the street and began counting. We all started running away, scattering to find our hiding spots. I remember that I suddenly got this idea to hide behind the abandoned house. I figured nobody lived there, so no one would be mad that I went in their yard, and I also thought that my friend would never think to look there. I felt like I had almost found a loophole in the game and would easily win for sure. So I went onto the property and then into the backyard. Then I crouched down behind one corner of the house. The backyard to this property seemed to go back kind of far. There appeared to be a woods at the end of the yard that went on for who knows how long. Several minutes went by, and I knew that my friend was looking for everyone. I couldn't hear much from where I was, but I did hear a little bit of chatter from some of my friends off in the distance. As time went on, I felt more and more confident that I wouldn't be found and would win the game. I was just waiting to hear them say that everyone had been found except for me. So when I was just sitting behind the house back there, I casually turned around. When I did, I saw this man standing in front of the woods. He was staring right at me. The guy was somewhat big, and I couldn't tell many details about him other than that. It was really dark out. I had no idea who he was, and it really creeped me out. As soon as I saw him, I got up and ran back around the house. I didn't care about hide and seek anymore. After making it around the house and down the driveway, I saw a couple of my friends in the street. They saw me running and then looked behind me. The man had come out around the house and was standing sort of at the side of it. When we all saw him, I think everybody got really freaked out and just scattered. At that point, we all went running back to our houses and then went inside. Everybody knew that that property was abandoned, so seeing a random man walk out from the side of it meant it was time to go inside. After we all went back to our houses, it was already getting late, and we wouldn't be able to stay out for much longer anyways. So none of us went back out, and I was really creeped out by seeing the guy. I really never expected it. However, I didn't tell my parents or anything. That night, I don't remember much else until I went to bed. My bedroom was at the back side of the house, and I had a window out to the backyard. I remember waking up sometime in the middle of the night. The first thing I noticed was that there was a knocking sound from my bedroom window, and that must have been what woke me up. I looked up and saw a man standing there, looking in. He was the same guy that I saw in the backyard of the abandoned house. The guy was just staring at me on the other side of the window. I got up and ran out of my room to my parents' bedroom next door. I started banging on their door like crazy until they got up. When we returned to my bedroom, the man was gone. I remember that my dad went outside and looked around the property, but he couldn't find him. After coming back inside, my parents called the police. They arrived several minutes later, and I don't really remember much after that, but I know that the next day, I told one of my friends about it. She said that she also saw a man at her window the previous night. He went away pretty quickly though. This guy must have went to at least 2 of our houses. After that though, nobody in our neighborhood saw him again. It still gives me the creeps to think about it to this day.